Welcome, one and all, to the Winston Creosote Godbold Reaction Channel. My name is David, and I'll be reacting today to Star Trek Picard Season 3, Episode 4, No Win Scenario, which I think many of us have thought, hey, that's the Kobayashi Maru. And the criteria that I use to judge Star Trek to determine whether I think it's a good Star Trek episode or a good series is actually shown down in the description. And I go into some detail about that criteria in earlier videos on the channel. So if you've not seen those reactions, please take time to watch them. I think you'll have a better understanding of what I'm trying to do and determining what is good and not is good Trek. Now, please note there will be spoilers in this reaction. If you don't want your viewing experience diminished because you have not yet seen the episode, please do not watch this until you've taken time to watch the episode. I want you to enjoy it fully, and even if it's a year from now. I know sometimes streaming, we watch things at different times, 6 months from now, a year from now, a month from now. So whenever you get an opportunity to watch the show, please come back and then watch the reaction at that time so that nothing is spoiled for you. First things first, this episode is directed by Jonathan Frakes, and I think Jonathan Frakes always brings his A game. For whomever selects the directors for shows, I have no idea how that works in Hollywood. 15 quatloos to that person for making that decision, because I always think it makes an episode better to have Jonathan involved, and I think this episode is no exception. Another thing about this episode I really like is it seems to adhere to Gene Roddenberry's vision just a little bit more than the previous episodes in the story arc, and I think that makes it a show that's easier to watch and more enjoyable to watch. The episode begins 5 years ago in 10 Forward in San Francisco with a flashback to Picard talking to some younger Starfleet folks, kind of giving them a history of, some of the adventures that he has had where they can kind of learn from him. At first, it seems a little off-putting to him, but he gets into it for a little bit. But one of the main things that he tells them that I think is great is that even in the worst situations, if you stay true to each other and your crew, there is always hope, and that's music to my ears, because Star Trek needs to be hopeful, especially in a time like we're living through today. And nowhere is hope more needed than on the Titan, who is battle damaged and is falling into the nebula, being pulled to the core of the nebula where it has a gravity well. And right now they're damaged to the point where they have no electricity. Essentially, the energy is running very, very low. They don't have the power to escape the nebula. So Riker orders that the remaining power be given to life support, which will probably only give them 4 hours of time to survive. Each bridge member gets an opportunity to give Captain Riker their ideas on what should be done, their concerns, steps that might help, steps that won't help. And I really appreciate that. It's a nice dialogue, free-flowing, everyone being respectful, and what I would expect of Star Trek and what you'd expect the bridge crew to do. So that's very good to see. Now, in the previous episodes, we discovered, hey, there's a changeling on board, and I theorized that, hey, this changeling was here the whole time. He wasn't planted there because of Picard and Riker coming on. That is something that they begin to realize. Seven comes to the conclusion, this person's been here the entire time. What is the more devious plot that's unfolding that they need to get a handle on and get resolved? So Seven, in discussions with Riker, comes up with a plan to help search for the changeling, and also has a lot of dialogue with Shaw on different ideas on how to deal with it. Keep in mind, Seven in the Delta Quadrant never had to deal with the changelings. The Dominion War happened without her involvement because they just were not there. And so for her, it's new, but for Captain Shaw, Captain Riker, those are people she can talk to get some ideas now that she's been tasked with solving how to find the changeling. Because of the impending disaster, I think as Riker sees it, he goes to speak to Picard and suggests that Picard speaks to his own son in the time they have left, that 4 hours, to get to know him just a little bit better. And Riker is basing this discussion on his own personal experience of the loss of his own son and how that despair, trying to cope with death, the finality of death, has led to the problems in his relationship with Deanna and his daughter. He doesn't want Picard to have to go down that same path. Picard does meet with his son in 10 Forward again, the San Francisco 10 Forward, but this time in a holodeck. on the Titan. It's a favorite place of Picard. And so they're talking a little bit, and Jack is like, what are we even doing this for? And how can the holodeck have power during this time? And Picard explains it runs on its own power cell for moments just like these. If there's a kind of a disaster going on or some type of distressful situation, it can act as a sanctuary. And they have a good dialogue back and forth, where Jack is basically like, I don't really need this discussion. And Picard is like, I do. So can I get to know you a little bit better? Maybe know why you didn't want me in your life. It's a good quality discussion that they go through. Hit a little bit more on that later on, why it's important. Now, Shaw enters the holodeck as well, and Shaw is still injured. He's been injured from having been hurt on the bridge. I'm not certain if he has a broken leg exactly or what the injury was, but he shows up slightly intoxicated from the pain medications that he's on, and he has heard Picard and Jack talking, and he goes into a tirade against Picard. It's very clear now that Shaw was part of the battle at Wolf 359. And not only does he have the PTSD because of that battle itself, he's also suffering from survivor's guilt. He was one of 50 people chosen to live off his ship just randomly by a lieutenant. She basically just chose the people because they only had one life raft left aboard the ship. So he took that, and that has hurt him for a long period of time. And he points out to Jack Crusher that it's your old man who was on board the Borg cube and killed 11,000 people. Picard handles it very well. Kind of leaves 10 forward holodeck. But it does show what is eating at Shaw, why he has that complicated relationship with Seven, why he's not comfortable with Picard, as he does have PTSD from what you have to admit is a very horrible experience. And so he's still working through that. And also the survivor's guilt is not something I was expecting to be a part of his story, but he's having to move through both of those psychological issues. And I think as the story arc goes along, we'll see that he gets better and better with that. But I think it's a very real thing. If you were to stand in front of the person who killed everybody on your ship and killed 11,000 people, and now you're told there's nothing wrong with that person, and in fact, there's nothing wrong with them, they were kind of just possessed at the time, that might be hard to internalize and accept. And I think that's being shown honestly in this kind of dialogue that Shaw and Picard are having. As I mentioned earlier, Shaw and Seven begin to work together on a solution to find the changeling. He tells her to go look for his bucket, his vase, which kind of surprises her, his pot, as he calls it. And she actually does find it in the quarters of the person the changeling had replaced. And it was actually up in a light panel, not unlike the phaser that we see in a Star Trek episode in the original series, hidden in a light panel, which does make things easier to find when people do that. So she's carrying that. Just happens to walk by the changeling, and he's like, oh my, she's on to me. And so changeling tries to kill her. She wounds it, and it escapes again. But now they're on to the changeling. And so Shaw, Seven, and Riker have come up with a pretty good plan on how to engage it, how to draw the changeling out so they can deal with the changeling once and for all, while at the same time, still working on the ship and getting it repaired so that they can get out of the nebula. We have a brief interlude aboard the Shrike where Vadic, I'm not sure what she does. Does she cut off her hand? Does she slit her wrist? And I'm not even sure what creature comes out. I'm not sure if there's a changeling attached to her hand, mimicking her hand, living inside her blood, or if this is in fact another species unrelated to the changelings. My initial thought is it's a changeling, but it certainly doesn't act like one in how it moves. So I'm not sure what this is, but Vadic is told by this entity that she has to go in to the nebula and get Jack Crusher. So Jack Crusher must have had some kind of interaction with some species. Maybe he healed them, and they're actually trying to get his help. That could be part of it, or maybe they don't like him at all. But she's told to go back in there, and she says we can't with a certain kind of weapons. The portal weapon has some gravimetric qualities to it, so it won't work in a gravity well. They discharge, they release those weapons off of the ship, and they float away. I'm now hoping that going forward, the portal weapon will not be something that she'll have access to because she left it behind. We'll have to see how that goes. She does re-enter the nebula to go ahead and then find where the Titan is. A lot of the science teams have been analyzing the nebula. It has various pulses of electric energy, but also it seems to be bioelectric energy. And so they're trying to figure out what this is. And it's Beverly who kind of figures it out, that the nebula is not a stellar nursery. There's not going to be stars born in this nebula, but this nebula is actually a living entity that's about to give birth to an unknown race of creatures. And that energy pulse that they're feeling that's coming through there are actually some form of contractions in the nebula. And they're so powerful that they're going to destroy the Titan because it does not have the shielding and so forth. And so they need to get out as quickly as they can. Now, of course, there's a lot of people who are not happy with the situation. How are they going to escape? So they have a great discussion in, again, the briefing room where there's no one, the ready room, where there's no one else really able to hear it. And they kind of have a session where everyone's kind of disagreeing, not sure what direction to go. But again, I think it's done professionally and it's done privately for the most part. And they come up with a solution that, hey, hope is the only way. The idea that we've come up with of actually using the energy from the nebula itself to recharge the ship through the nacelles is the best idea that we can come up with. It may not work, but certainly we're going to die here for sure, just waiting for our energy reserves to deplete. And if we work together as a team, that gives us the best hope. And that does wash over everybody in the room. And we see at this point the gelling of the crew. In my opinion, it's the first time we've seen the crew gel. Everyone, Jack, Beverly, Picard, Riker, Seven. I'm not sure if Shaw's actually in the room at that time, but everyone is coming together and that team is now gelling. And I think that's going to make a big difference in the episodes going forward. The conflict will be less, and the hope will be greater that we're not in a no-win scenario after all. As part of the process of getting the ship going, Seven and Shaw have to work together. Their relationship is coming easier. I think there's more respect. Again, he's having to work through his PTSD issues, which I'm not sure she knows about. But so they're having some discussions there and in working on the ship to get the engines to come back online through the nacelles. They end up killing the changeling that was aboard that ship. So that individual has been eliminated, but their body is still on the ship for study. So I think that'll be something that comes up as well. While everyone on the ship is rejoicing, for lack of a better term, about the escape from the nebula and the new life forms around the nebula, because hey, that's what they're here to do, is seek out new life. Picard kind of has a flashback to the beginning of the show when he's in that bar talking to some younger Starfleet officers about how your crew is your family. Someone from the bar speaks up to him, and he doesn't know who that person is. And that person says, "What about your real family? Do you have a real family outside of Starfleet?" And Picard says, "I've never needed one outside of Starfleet." That turned out to be Jack Crusher. So Jack had tried to reach out to him, didn't much like that answer, and left the bar 5 years ago. Now, as they're standing on the bridge, having escaped the nebula, observing this wondrous new life form, thousands of them, it looked like, floating around the ship, Jack is seeing what Jean-Luc was talking about, the power of the teamwork of the family of Starfleet. Picard is now realizing that he missed out on that relationship with his son. It's an excellent scene. I think it's done far better than the scene where you find out that Beverly, and when Beverly and Picard are kind of looking at each other and you realize that Jack is Picard's son. This scene, they're looking at each other and they both kind of realize, yeah, 5 years ago, we could have met sooner. I didn't understand. Picard is thinking, I didn't understand what you were talking about. I didn't understand that you were my son when you asked that question. And I think Jack Crusher is realizing, yes, Starfleet absolutely can be a home. Look at this beautiful relationship that everyone has. So I find that very, very touching. When we're looking at it, I think we have a lot of positives. I rate this episode a 4 out of 5. And the reasons I do that is we're now seeing a crew that is extremely professional, in my opinion. We're seeing a call to hope for people. That was a big discussion in there, even in a no-win scenario. Having that call to hope, I think, is a very important part of what they're dealing with. You have a prelude of healing for Riker and Deanna. You have a discussion at the end of the episode. You have a prelude for healing for Shaw and Seven. I think you do for healing between Jack and Picard. The teamwork, people coming together despite their differences, despite someone being a Borg and someone, not being a Borg. They're coming together from that. And Picard is finally acting. And this is the first episode I would say I've seen it this season. Picard acts as Jean-Luc Picard. from the next generation. The voice, the intonations, the motions, the confidence are all there, and that is fantastic. And I also love the idea that we're celebrating new life, which is what the Federation is about. So thank you so very much for watching today. Please like and subscribe if you've not done so. I look forward to seeing you again next week when I review the next episode of Star Trek Picard. Thank you. Have a great day.